24 years ago, I wrote one of my smoking clinic follow-up letters. I titled it The Law of Addiction. Now, it's been kind of hard for me to figure out how to transcribe isn't the right word, but how to relate some of the smoking clinic letters to video format. I mean, most of the letters, I would say, are related to like issues that I can just recount those issues, or stories that I can recount of individuals who went through the clinic, or just general experiences that lots of people have in quitting smoking. But there's a few letters. Letters like My Cigarette, My Friend, and The Isolation of the Widowed Smoker. They were a little bit more of a creative writing project for me. The Law of Addiction, I remember I had numerous prominent attorneys in the Chicago area that were in my Stop Smoking clinic. And I remember when I wrote the particular letter, I was writing it with them in mind. I mean, these are people who I knew were just always trying to look for loopholes in things. I mean, that's how people in their profession generally think. So I wrote this letter specifically for those people, but it was also kind of tied to the time frame at that point. It was a time where people understood about drug addiction, and people understood about how, if a person is a recovering alcoholic, they really can't take a drink. And if people are recovering heroin addicts, oh gosh, they can't take injections of heroin or any kind of narcotic. So it was a time when that was understood about other drugs, but it wasn't understood about smoking. It either wasn't being categorized as an addiction by, many professionals in the field, or even at a time where people were calling it an addiction, it was somehow thought of differently and could be treated differently. So I wrote The Law of Addiction, and it became one of the more popular letters in the series, and an important one. Now, last night I sat and just read it, and I figured maybe I would just attach it in a file like that. But it doesn't sound right when I'm trying to do videos to just, like I'm reading a bedtime story kind of thing. So it's just, I've said this before in other videos, I'm not a very good reader when I'm reading out loud. It's like you can tell it's being read. And if I try to read it in a video now, I'm not going to be looking at the screen, I'm going to be looking at a paper and I'm reading to you. So I figured I can't capture what I have in that letter. I hope you go find the letter. It's in the whyquit.com library. My guess is if you just Google The Law of Addiction, it's going to come up. You're going to find an article by me there, and you can read it that way. But I guess for this purpose, I'm just going to kind of recant, not read it, but just recant the concepts that I had in that letter and why they were important. What it was talking about was how people were often really furious with me when it came to how I treated when someone would take a cigarette. Now keep in mind, when I had someone in a clinic, if they came in and they smoked a cigarette, they were out of the clinic. I just didn't deal with them anymore in the clinic. I may have dealt with them on the side. I may have dealt with them on the phone. I may have dealt with them in other ways, but not in the clinic. Let's understand why. Because when in the clinic, they weren't just a dialogue between me and the other person about what happened. It was affecting everybody else in that clinic. It was affecting everyone who was there with the understanding that if they took a puff, they'd be out. And it was one of the reasons at that point in time that they weren't taking a puff. They wanted to stay in the program. It was the incentive to help them get through that one day. But that was all I was worried about at that point, was getting them through that one day. The next day we were going to deal with the next day. With the same rule in place. If they took a puff, they were going to be out. So that was the policy that we had in the clinic. They couldn't take a puff on a cigarette. Well, there were times where a person would, take a puff, take a cigarette, take a few cigarettes, but they'd want to start right over again. And, the clinic was going on and they wanted to join up. Well, they were just furious with me that I wouldn't let them in. And it was like they had this concept like, we're going to fail because of our policy, because of the fact that we were making such a big deal out of them just, taking a puff. or a cigarette. Or again, some of these people were smoking 2 or 3 cigarettes, or maybe 5 cigarettes, but they used to smoke 40 a day, so this was still a great feat they were pulling off. No, it wasn't. And again, if we were dealing with any other drug addiction, at that time, I think it would have been understood. But with smoking, it was just so widely seen differently that, slips were just common. You have to expect them to occur. There's still a lot of professionals who believe this. It's part of the process of slipping. No, part of the process of relapsing maybe is slipping, but not of quitting. Of quitting, slipping is going back to smoking. Well, I had these attorneys in the clinics at this time, and I was thinking, well, how they must think. I was just the person that was forcing them to go back to smoking because of the action that they took. And so the way I put it in the letter, it's like, well, maybe if you're thinking in terms like this, you shouldn't be joining a smoking clinic. You should be, as far as if you take a slip or you take a puff and you just don't want to consider that a big deal, smoking clinic is where you should go argue this kind of situation. You should just take it to a jury, 12 impartial people. Yeah, because you know what, if you were to impanel 12 impartial people who really didn't understand much about drug addiction or about smoking or about quitting, and and get a good attorney for these people to plead their case, to lay out all the things that went wrong that particular day and all the background, their childhood issues that they had, and just all the different reasons that, they had to have that cigarette. Man, you get 12 impartial people to hear your side of the story of how you took a puff, but you weren't going to go back. It really shouldn't matter that you had all these other things going on, and how could you have dealt with those situations? And you had these withdrawals, you had these emotions, you just everything was wrong, and you get 12 impartial people to listen to you, and you present a good case, or you have an attorney present a really good case for you. There's a really good chance that those 12 people would agree with you, and yeah, you're really innocent of any wrongdoing. It's understandable what you do. It was justifiable. They should easily come up to the conclusion that, you should be able to stay in the program, and you should be able to now quit smoking without any withdrawal because, it wasn't your fault that you took it. It was understandable reasons. So, you're free. You don't have any withdrawal now. You're done. You're clear. Yeah, a jury could come up with that kind of verdict for you, that you're innocent. Well, the problem is, as soon as you'd walk out of that courthouse and you'd be, on the steps and free from, having just presented this, trying testimony, trying to justify what just occurred, there's a really good chance that you were going to, reach into your pocket if you still had them, or stop the next person you found on the street and ask them for a cigarette because you were walking out of that session in drug withdrawal. See, it didn't make a difference whether you were innocent of thoughts or not. What happened was you reintroduced nicotine into your bloodstream, and now your body was making demands. In the letter I put down, it sounds like, by American standards of justice, it's not fair. It's a cruel and unusual punishment that people go through. That, when they take a puff, it's that they have to go back to smoking. That doesn't seem fair. I don't care if it seems fair or not. It's the reality of the situation. It's how drug addiction works. You administer the drug is taking you down again. It's taking you down the path that you were when you first quit and where you were for the weeks and months and years before you quit. You were addicted to nicotine. You are still addicted to nicotine. Again, let's understand, you're addicted to nicotine the rest of your life once you quit. Once you quit, it becomes an asymptomatic addiction. It becomes an addiction that there's no, outward appearance showing that it's there. There's no feelings from that addiction. There's no withdrawal a year or two or a decade later, where your body has certain, tremors because you don't smoke anymore. No, that doesn't happen. There's no need for nicotine whatsoever. But your brain has been altered, and other organs in your body which deal with nicotine have been altered. And if nicotine gets put back into the system, it kicks the receptors back into action, it puts you back into withdrawal. Organs like your liver are really efficient at detoxifying the nicotine, trying to get it out faster and faster, which is how you establish tolerance to start with. Your body is primed at that point, and you're going into a withdrawal process, and you're going to have to fight it again to get off. And you may not have that fight in you. You may not have the ability to get off. I always say, taking a puff doesn't mean you have to go back to smoking, but it means you're either going back to smoking or you're likely going into withdrawal again. And those are both lousy options. There's always been a third option out there where you don't have to deal with either of those circumstances, and that option is just don't take the cigarette. So if you want to avoid all the legal hassles, if you want to avoid, all the rationalizations and justifications, and most important, if you want to avoid the withdrawal and having to deal with the consequences of being a smoker again, it's still just a matter of making and sticking to your personal commitment to never take another puff.